welcome to Driving Force Radio, where we seek to discover each and every week what drives today's leaders. As you know, Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast just about a week ago, and the devastation that we've seen has been unreal. Here you have one of the most populated parts of our country completely devastated, infrastructure completely destroyed, housing, and just basic needs gone. And so on today's show, we're going to be talking about building resilient communities. My co-host, as usual on these sections, is Kelly De La Torre with Rapid Tech Transit, a Colorado-based company. Welcome to the show, Kelly.
Thanks for having me, Jan.
So Kelly, talk to us about the resilience of communities and what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, it's interesting, flying around Twitter has been this constant discussion about, was Hurricane Sandy a result of climate change? And Governor Cuomo saying we really need to get the citizenry involved because there are indications that this storm was made stronger due to our changing climate. The ocean levels are 18 inches higher than normal. That's what they think caused all of the flooding. But the point is, actually, and Governor Cuomo has made this comment too, it doesn't really matter what the cause was. We have to, when we rebuild these communities, we have to take into account that our weather patterns are getting increasingly complicated and disastrous for especially our coastal areas, including the Gulf Coast areas. So when we rebuild these communities, we've got to take into account that they need to be resilient. We need to use these new technologies to make sure that we can come back from a disaster faster.
Absolutely, and that we're not leaving tens of thousands of people just standing by on the side without power, without water, without those key core needs that people here in the United States have. And to address this first, we have John Spisak, the CEO of SolaRover, a Colorado-based mobile solar generator company, to sort of talk us through how we as a country, how FEMA, how citizenry in general can sort of take us to this next level in building these resilient communities anywhere where they may be. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you very much. I think we've all witnessed the images that were ubiquitous on all of the television networks in the last week. We saw people huddled around power strips in New York trying to charge cell phones. We saw gas station lines that were 2 miles long, people very upset, in some cases even getting into very violent confrontations over fuel. We've seen seniors huddled in dark homes as the nights get colder and colder. And in a country like the United States, those are images that make us very uncomfortable and things that we do not want to see. We do have technologies that can help prevent this or at least mitigate this. And it seems that we saw these images years ago with Katrina, and we're seeing the same images today.
And John, it brings me to really my first question. We're seeing these first images today, and Katrina was years ago. How is it that we as a country or as the government haven't addressed some of these critical issues? I mean, we're seeing hospitals shutting down in New York City with some of the best public health and health infrastructure in the country shutting down. Why aren't we doing something about this?
And I think the key word is infrastructure. And one of the things that we should have learned from Katrina was that storms of this magnitude, and if they're getting worse, have the ability to destroy and severely damage infrastructure. Mm-hmm. The only way to counter disrupted infrastructure is to have what's called distributed power. And that's little packets of power, widely scattered, widely disseminated, so that if the infrastructure is damaged, basic services for basic human needs can continue. As long as we're dependent on a grid infrastructure, especially in areas that are threatened, without distributed power, we're not going to be able to get away from these images. And the next storm, the next nor'easter this week, the next hurricane next summer are going to repeat this over and over again.
But and you see, so that's really the traditional response, is that then the storm hits and then they bring in all of these diesel-powered generators.
Right, and you've seen the images, the large Air Force transports bringing in hundreds of generators. And what that requires is a lot of manpower to get those generators distributed and into areas where they're needed. Then they have to be supplied continuously with fuel. So the generator alone is not good enough, but you also have to make sure that you can continually supply them with fuel. One of the things that that our company developed out of Katrina was a distributed generator that runs on solar power, so that it makes the system wireless, so that you can have a generator in place, it can be operating all of the time, and then when there's a major disaster, it doesn't require those logistics to support it. It doesn't require the refueling. You saw in these service station pictures, a lot of those service stations had 2-mile gas lines because they couldn't resupply the fuel. They were able to pump the fuel by hand, but they couldn't resupply the tanks once they were empty. This is a way to be very proactive and at the same time protect the environment.
So when we talk about this, again, I want to come back to this. It seems like we've learned little from Katrina, and here we are again, only now in a much more populated area. And I'm not discounting anything where Katrina hit, but we're in a much more populated area. We're in the financial hub of this country, and we are down. And I know I'm, again, not taking any direct shots at any politicians in the city, but it seems like our national folks that are in charge of infrastructure, FEMA, Homeland Security, those groups would be looking at these in some critical nature, looking at this problem and trying to get ahead of it. Why aren't we seeing that, John?
Well, I think this is a country that gets very comfortable with doing things the way we've done them in the past,
yes,
and the way they've been successful in the past. And what we're seeing now is, like the evolution of the information age, things are accelerating. Things are happening faster and faster. Storms are coming faster. They're getting more and more powerful. And the need for distributed energy is becoming absolutely paramount in this country to give us security in times like this. And the infrastructure is well established. It's the best in the world, but it's extremely vulnerable to events like this. Mm-hmm. And government, because it's so large, because it's so integrated, it has a very difficult time trying to recognize benefit and then trying to make some changes. And this requires changes at different levels. It requires state officials to recognize that always reacting to something carries a terrible cost. It carries extra days of human suffering and damage and lost economic activity, early deaths, early loss of resources take place because they're not proactively prepared. And it requires a change in thinking. I think we're starting to see, especially in the East, after the devastation of this storm, that people are now looking for different solutions. And this is a solution that they should be looking at very seriously, because it can prevent those first several days of severe damage, loss of life, and massive disruption in what the loss of infrastructure causes.
Plus, your technology is very unique, and you have looked at what it would take to cover about a 300-mile radius, right? And so you can pre-position these things. Could you explain a little bit about?
The whole purpose of what we've done is to have these critical power generators, and that's what they are. They're power generators. The only difference is instead of using diesel fuel, they use fuel from the sun.
Sure.
But the critical aspect of this is they can be pre-positioned, they can be in place, and most importantly, they can operate in between these major disasters. And the reason for that is because they're solar powered, they're zero emission, and they're silent. So they can be in neighborhoods, they can be at schoolhouses, they can be at dialysis clinics, they can be everywhere that critical services are needed, and they can be operating offsetting utility bills, helping the local utilities with overstressed infrastructures and peak power demands balance their loads. And then when there's an emergency, they're already in place from day one. They don't have to wait for a governor or a president to declare a disaster. They don't have to wait for the National Guard or the Air Force to mobilize aircraft and truckloads of generators. They don't have to wait for a large number of people to set up a logistics resupply so that fuel can come into the area. They can provide critical life-saving services. And I don't mean they're going to power buildings in Lower Manhattan. I don't mean they're going to get your Walmart up and running. But to protect your critical medicines, your food that's going to spoil, keep the children safe if they're huddled in a classroom or a schoolhouse, the police communications up and running, the fire station so that they can function. Mm-hmm. Yes, these are the critical services that people need. space heaters in neighborhoods, so at least the seniors in the dark house can have a couple of lights and a space heater keep them safe at night. We do not have this today. We have the Rockaways, we have Staten Island, we have millions of people who are now faced with a nor'easter, freezing nights in the dark with absolutely no power.
So John, what's the solution? Are there any of the SolaRover facilities or generators on the ground there right now working? And if not, how do we get them there?
Well, there aren't. And there's a number of reasons for that, and that's because this is a non-traditional response. I think what's really important is you don't have to take my word for this. A product like this is something that on a small scale should be inserted into a couple of critical communities, whether it's in the Gulf Coast or the Northeast or both, so that they're in place and they're up and they're prepared, so that when the next disaster strikes, it will become evidently clear to everyone involved that these are going to work, they're going to do exactly what they're supposed to do. And I think once the public sees that, and I think government officials see that it's going to bring that relief instantaneously, and it's going to prevent loss of life, and it's going to prevent this severe damage, then they will embrace this concept. And by the way, what's most important is this is a concept that will actually save the taxpayers money. The cost of inserting this type of distributed power into an area like New Jersey or New York or the Gulf Coast is actually cheaper than the cost of inserting these response diesel generators, because the diesel generators have to be transported in, they have to be fueled. Once the emergency's over, they have to be cleaned and put back in the warehouse. No one can run a diesel generator because of air quality standards and disruption in the neighborhood except in an emergency. These can be run 24/7 all of the time.
Right, and also you're not only are you able to generate revenue using these 24/7 outside of an emergency, but in the case of an emergency, like you just mentioned, but I just want to reiterate, is that you have a lot of risk mitigation. You're still powering these pharmacies, or potentially powering these pharmacies where you could lose hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of drugs that are very necessary in the event of an emergency, plus all of your critical food supplies. And then if you were running that pharmacy and somehow they could power that with something else, you can roll these out and run an operations unit, a command center, run for cell phones. And so, it's such a viable solution that also cuts emissions, which is one of the causal factors of climate change. And so it just seems like such a solution, and that it's pretty frustrating that we can't be proactive. We always have to be reactive. In an emergency situation.
Yeah, I think that's where I was going with this. It seems like we didn't learn much from Katrina, and I know we did, and I'm not trying to talk negatively, but here we are again in this hugely populated area around New York and New Jersey, even as far in as Philadelphia and those areas. And people are still being affected a week later, and we're going to see some of this go on for a very long time, especially in these coastal regions. And I guess that's my question is there a way for listeners, for citizens to get out there and say, you know what, this isn't working. We're going to be out here stuck in a nor'easter. We have no lights, no heat, little food. There's no hotel we can afford in New York City. How do we get these things into communities, John?
And I agree. And I think it's got to be a combination of things. I think the public has to ask their leaders to change the approach that we've been following for the last 50 to 100 years in this country. Every time there's an emergency, we always respond in the same way. And I think we're now seeing with greater frequency that response is last century's response. We need a new type of response. I think when you add world terrorism to all of this, and you add the aging of the U.S. grid and the growing population and the continual stresses on top of increasing frequency and strength of storms, we have to find a new model in this country. And this is a model that both government leadership should at least give a fair hearing to. I'm I'm not here suggesting that they write a check tomorrow, but they need to understand what it can do, and they need to understand by testing as a pilot demonstration the benefit that it can bring, because it's extremely important.
Absolutely. So then, for the listeners out there along the East Coast, if they would write to, we talked on just a couple weeks ago about Governor Christie in New Jersey, and how he has made New Jersey into the #1 solar state in the country. And I was just wondering the other day, how did that impact their response to, and I'm sure that we don't know yet, but I'm sure that it did make an impact, because those houses that have distributed generation on their roofs, or those stores like Kohl's and Walmart, and the stores that are really making a change to this distributed energy generation, they're in a much better position. And so I think what we need to get, and what Governor Cuomo said the other day was, we have to convince the citizenry, then we have to get the public policy people on board. And I think now is the time that we can really go and say, this is very, very helpful to the public. And even here last summer with the fires, we're dragging in diesel-fired generators to run a command post in the middle of a giant fire. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
No.
And so here he has a technology where you don't need fuel, you don't need maintenance, you don't have to set up a schedule for them to keep transporting this hazardous material into a fire zone. And so I guess where we are is that we really need to just start building up a bigger conversation around this.
And the beauty, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, is that they're mobile. They're towable units. You can store these similar to a diesel-fired generator, similarly. I mean, you can keep them in a warehouse and keep them there till you need them. And then you roll them out, open them up, and let the sun take over. Am I correct in that? Well, these are a totally different kind of technology that opens all kinds of new doors in this distributed conversation.
Yeah, they're highly mobile. They're as mobile as a generator. They can be towed by a pickup truck or an SUV, or larger ones by larger trucks. But here's the thing: they do not need to be stored in a warehouse until they're needed.
Oh, okay.
Because they're solar, they're not emitting any fumes. There's zero emissions: carbon, nitrogen, sulfur. There's no emissions, and they operate silently. Anyone who's been around a diesel generator knows the din of that noise.
Yes.
So the point is, why keep them in a warehouse? If you look at Connecticut and you look at Massachusetts during the storm, all of the trees that fell and blocked all the roadways, even if you have a fleet of generators in a warehouse, how do you get them to where they're needed because the roads are blocked? These units can be pre-positioned at the most critically needed locations: police stations, fire stations, pharmacies. They can be plugged in and they can be operating all of the time, because there's no emission, there's no need for refuel. So why keep them in a warehouse? So
definitely better than a diesel generator solution in terms of usability and its ability to work in the critical areas that are going on in disaster zones.
But also the part that I find really exciting about it is that it takes one man to deploy, because it's all, the way that they've designed the SolaRover is it's all remote controlled. And so it folds up to, I always compare it to about the size of a horse trailer, but is it a little smaller than that?
They typically fold up into a cube, depending on the size, that's 7 by 7 by 7, or maybe 7 by 7 by 20, depending on the size. But it doesn't take up much more transportation space than a traditional generator on a trailer. And then it's the solar array that opens up when you get it to location. But again, this importance of understanding that what has been created here is the wireless generator. Diesel generators are always wired because you have to have this logistical tether of constant fuel supply, constant maintenance, constant checking oil and filters. The solar generator is wireless. It draws its power from the sun wherever it's located, so it doesn't need a supply line. And it's basically maintenance free, so you don't need people constantly checking its fluid or its filters. And that is really important, because it's like the difference between a payphone or having to go into a store to use a telephone or your cell phone. And it's a dramatic difference.
And let's just take a look at the diesel generator versus the SolaRover. You've got another revenue stream in that you can run it constantly. You don't have any fuel costs over the lifetime. So you really make up your costs, and then it's just basically it's free power that then can be transported from where it's needed. Like it just does. It makes so much sense to me.
But most importantly, during a crisis, an emergency like this, when you think of the cost of airlifting a generator, airlifting the fuel, bringing in hundreds of people to supply that generator and keep it functioning, that one event will pay, more than pay, for a single mobile solar generator, which can be used all of the time and will last 20 years.
Absolutely, but then it's also online immediately.
Yes.
The mobile solar generator's online immediately and working, whereas I think we've seen it on the news now for 4 days, lines 2 miles long to just get fuel for a generator that powers one home.
Yeah,
and we're seeing all kinds of critical issues around human disruption on top of business disruption and all the other things that are going on.
Yeah, and if you're a homeowners association and you've got a nice, comfortable neighborhood and the power's gone, granted, to run everything in the neighborhood takes a lot of power. But if you could just have your street lights on to prevent looting in the evenings and not have to wait for the governor to declare a disaster and then wait another 3 or 4 days for a generator to be brought in, doubtful you would get a generator for that purpose because they're going to go to the most critical needs first. So a week, 2 weeks go by, the neighborhood's completely black. What's going to happen? I mean, that peace of mind, that sense of security, that small ability to just do something like that, where this unit could be plugged in, positioned at the, in a cul-de-sac or the corner of the street to take care of that block or that neighborhood, it's invaluable.
And the ability also to couple the generator with a water purification unit or any other, or string multiple generators together, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
The system is designed to connect multiple generators so you can greatly expand your power depending on your need. We can build in a water treatment system. So for instance, if we were powering a gas station to alleviate those gas lines, we could also be supplying purified water. So when people came to the gas station and sat in line for 3 hours, they could get enough drinking water for the day in addition to the gasoline for their vehicle.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So John, we're running out of time, but tell us what listeners need to know. How can they engage with SolaRover? How can they learn more? How can they push this agenda forward so that we're helping those folks on the East Coast as well as that next area that gets hit by a storm like this or gets hit by some other natural disaster that's going on?
Well, we would certainly like to hear from folks who live in areas where this could be helpful to them. But I think more importantly, we would like to hear from business and political leaders to work with us, because if we can set up just a handful of pilot projects around the country at very minimal cost, I think the next time there's a disaster, it would clearly prove the point on multiple levels: readiness, protection of human life, and protection of the local economy, but most importantly, it would illustrate the tremendous cost savings to the taxpayer in having to respond to these types of emergencies.
And can you tell us where you can find your website and that kind of information?
The website is very simple. It's www.SolaRover.com. And if you want to give us a call, it's 888-SOLAR-08.
Okay.
Okay. Again, that's SolaRover.com, SolaRover.com, or 888-SOLAR-08. And again, I'm just going to reiterate. These units, these solar mobile units, are really providing distributed power, and they really help in this response time and readiness. They're saving taxpayer dollars. They're helping save lives, and really at the end of the day, they're affecting our pocketbooks as the taxpayer because we're not paying so much in this response issue. And I think all critical issues as we head into elections, as we head into times where the East Coast is going to get hit by storm after storm as we head into winter, and we've already got disrupted issues. And I love that you guys have a solution, and hopefully we'll see some pilot projects go on that really help us address this going forward.
We do too, and we're happy to work with whoever can help get this out there and prove to everyone that it's not only a viable but a very cost-effective solution.
Really the thing is, let's change our thinking to being proactive rather than reactive in an emergency situation.
Absolutely. John, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, I appreciate it very much.
And for any listeners that want to learn more about the SolaRover technology, go to our website at theicosamagazine.com or go to the Women in Energy blog that Kelly runs, and you'll see more information there. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll be talking with Green Power Resource Management. Welcome back to Driving Force Radio, where we seek to discover what drives today's leaders. On the show today, we're talking about building and maintaining resilient communities, both here and abroad. But specifically, we're talking more about what we're doing here in the United States to build resilient communities. My co-host today is Kelly De La Torre from Rapid Tech Transit, a Denver-based consulting firm. Thanks for being with me, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jan.
And you know, in our last segment, we were talking a lot about the resiliency of the East Coast after Sandy, to be able to clean up and maintain what's happened to them as new storms continue to push in and nor'easters come in, and they are it's sort of this chicken and egg thing. There's not really an infrastructure built to be able to handle what's going on back on the East Coast. And in this segment, we're going to shift a little bit and talk more about water and wastewater and those pieces, those critical pieces of the infrastructure, correct?
Yep, but we're going to talk about some new technology and really using technologies, using distributed generation again, but different types of it for water and sanitation.
Yep, and our guest is Ralph Ciarlanti of Green Power Resource Management. Green Power was organized in 2008 and provides clean technology and renewable energy sources in the solar AC units, as well as mobile solar powered water filtration and purification units. And they really are working on this to help lower energy costs here in the U.S. as well as abroad, to reduce the U.S. dependency on foreign oil, reduce our carbon footprint, and address global climate change, and save lives by the delivery of clean water while creating high-paying green jobs here at home. So it's really one of these organizations that everyone should know about right now, Kelly.
Yeah, that they have a solution. They have the way to get this out to the people, not only here, but in these rural areas in Africa and areas where they really have a need for clean water, sanitation, and they're powered by the sun.
Absolutely.
So I'm so excited to talk to Ralph today.
Well, Ralph, thank you so much for being with us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Ralph, can you just give a little bit of a background on your company and the two main technologies that we're going to talk about today?
Yes, I can. You know, Green Power has a proprietary and patented technology. It's an environmental control system that can be applied to different products. The first two product lines that we've utilized this concept on is a mobile solar and wind powered water purification system. And we have two sizes of that unit available today. There's a small unit that produces 2,000 gallons of purified water on a daily basis, and then a larger unit that produces up to 50,000 gallons of purified water. And this unit is based on a ruggedized design. It's really designed for a very ruggedized application for remote areas in the field, in undeveloped countries, or in military and disaster recovery applications. The AC unit, we started to refer to it as a virtual power plant, because even though it's a DC engineered air conditioning unit and it's designed for high levels of efficiency, it really allows you to manage the renewable energy sources coming into your home or small commercial building. So for example, you can provide power via the solar panels or a wind turbine, The unit comes with a couple of batteries for storing energy, and then it will blend the renewable energy sources with AC or DC currents so that you're maximizing power efficiencies at all time. And when the unit's not in use, you can feed energy back into the grid so you can get close to obtaining this net zero energy. So it really is a neat system.
Absolutely. And I want to go back and talk about water first. You know, water is obviously the key to life. It's so important to everything we do. And I think we take it for granted here in the United States. But can you talk about some of the key water facts on a global basis, Ralph, and sort of frame up its impact, this impact of non-clean water on lives internationally, as well as what we may be seeing from impacts that are happening from disasters here in the U.S.?
I can share with you some details I got when I first started working with Green Power and doing my initial investigation and due diligence with the company. And I read some information that indicated close to 3.5 million people a year are dying from dirty and contaminated water. And there's roughly 1 out of every 8 people on the planet that don't have access to clean water. And so those, you know, that fact really got my attention because we're so lucky here in the U.S. You know, we walk into our homes and we turn on the kitchen faucet or we go to the bathroom. There's always clean water available. Right. And when you're in a developing country, that's not always the case. And then the amount of time that women in particular spend and young children spend getting up early in the morning, walking 2, 3, 4 miles to get, you know, a couple of gallons of fresh water for the day. That's just really hard to kind of get your arms around and imagine because, you know, we get up in the morning and we just go about our business. And we're not thinking about spending an hour or 2 hours looking for water that might not even be clean.
Right. Right, and it is a real barrier to women and girls in those remote areas because they do that first thing in the morning for their families and then they go to school and then they're sent out to get more water for the school. And the amount of time that they get to get educated is very small. And then bring in the sanitation issue and most of them, from your previous guests, they end up dropping out of school. So
absolutely, and it's relatively early. And
yeah.
So it's unfortunate.
Yeah, so this is, you're offering real solutions. Can we talk a little bit about the technology, especially for the water purification side? If you were to bring one of these into these areas, how does it work? What's the setup?
It's a very simple setup. Both the units, a small one and a large unit, are fully self-contained. They're easy to transport. The smaller unit, we call it our solar water cube. In most applications, it's going to end up running on solar power because that's more readily available. But if you're located in an area that is windy, you can also generate power by connecting it to a small wind turbine. It comes with a couple of batteries. So you set up your solar panels and the unit, you take your pump, you put it into your water source, and it starts generating water immediately. It's designed for very simple ease of use, very low levels of maintenance. You can theoretically run these units for 2 to 5 years without any maintenance required.
Oh, wow.
And then the only maintenance that is required is just the changing of filters. Simple hand tools, no fancy tools. They're really designed so that when you're off the grid in the middle of nowhere, you can work on these things if necessary. Most of the filters are back flushable. So all you do is you just flip a valve and the filters get cleaned out.
And so as far as training goes, you would be able to train local people to do this, it sounds like.
Very, very easily, yes. And the larger unit operates the exact same way. The larger unit can produce up to 50,000 gallons of purified water on a daily basis.
Wow.
So Ralph,
and with the batteries, it can...
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So with the batteries in the unit, it can even be filtering water in the evening after the sun goes down. And not all systems on the market can do that.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears now and talk about the AC units. And you said it's like a virtual power plant. Can you talk a little bit about that and tell us what that means exactly?
Well, we think the product differentiation in this system is not so much an efficiently designed air conditioning unit, but it's our patented IP. So we have a control board in the unit that really is managing all of the renewable energy sources coming into the unit. So whether you have wind or solar powered energy, when you fire this thing up, the first thing that's going to happen is going to there's enough power in the batteries to power up the unit. But more importantly, what this thing is doing is it's constantly searching for the cheapest form of energy to keep the air conditioning unit running. And then when the batteries are full, it feeds power back into the grid. And that's the real neat thing, because you could use the unit to run your air conditioner during the daytime, and then when you turn it off in the evening when it closes down, the unit is still running and it's feeding energy back into the grid. So it's lowering your utility bill. It's very easy with this system to provide power for an entire small home or a small office and not have a utility bill at the end of the month.
Wow.
Wow. And then could you also string them together consecutively to power a larger facility?
You can. We actually have a larger design system that's going to be released early next year that handles different, larger buildings in particular. But you can. We have a couple that installed 4 of these units in a large home in Florida. And their home had been destroyed twice in hurricanes. So when they rebuilt it, they installed 4 of these AC units and connected to both solar panels and wind turbines. It's a very windy area, so it worked very well for them. And they were installed 2 years ago in June of 2010, and they're very happy with the systems.
Wow, that's amazing. So, and that brings us back to what we've talked about on the first half of the show, is we're looking at Hurricane Sandy and how to build resilient communities. So could you tell us a little bit about, for example, if you had these units on a large facility or even small facility and it was struck by a hurricane, could you use the battery and the solar and not run the air conditioner and then use that to power the facility, or how would that work?
You sure can.
Yeah.
That's exactly how it works. So you just turn off the air conditioning unit and now you've got more power available to power up everything in your building.
So talk about that a little bit, Ralph, because we're seeing so much devastation on the East Coast, and they're going to get this double whammy with the nor'easter headed at them right now. And yet there are millions of people still without power, without heat, without clean water, without fuel. Talk about that a little bit. If we had systems like this, and we as a country, and I say that as a country, as politicians, as FEMA, if we looked at things more proactively instead of reactive, could we have a lot of these people online prior to these next storms hitting them? And how do we go about doing that, in your opinion, Ralph?
Well, when you start talking about disaster preparedness and disaster recovery, ideally what would be nice is to have some sort of a staging area in anywhere in the country where you prepare in advance for things like this, so that when a hurricane does come, each neighborhood or small town already has a facility set up ready to be dispatched on a moment's notice. So with our larger unit, those things could be kept in a warehouse on small trailers and then trucked out to a small town or community to help provide drinking water, rather than bringing in millions of bottles, plastic bottles of water.
Right.
And so that's one thing that could be done. The second thing that could be done is our virtual power plant. I have to remember to call it that by its new name, but the virtual power plant could do the same thing. It could be kept on a small platform and trailered into a community to be used to generate power. So one of the things I saw.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go on.
No, go ahead.
One of the news feeds I saw after the hurricane. Cell phones are going down even after the cell towers are back up, but batteries are running out and they have no place to charge their cell phone.
Yeah, that's in Colorado this past summer when we had the huge wildfires. Verizon Wireless trucks in, and AT&T and the other ones, would truck in these huge units with diesel-fired generators to run a cell tower and to run those charging stations and to do that. But the emissions are huge. They run into permitting issues very quickly. Whereas if we were proactive, like you're saying, we could have these sort of virtual power plants that are mobile, it sounds like.
Yes, exactly. And they could run off of solar or wind. You can charge them up so they're running overnight with the batteries that are in them. And yeah, I think there's a lot of things that could be done from a disaster preparedness standpoint to really help in situations like this.
Well, and I think too, Ralph, it's even more than that. As you talk about the technologies and how they go, and how they're put together with solar and wind and renewables. Obviously, you know, green power resource management is trying to address this issue of global climate change as well. Talk about that a little bit and what the implications are of the technologies that you have towards this global climate change issue.
Well, with both of these products, there's no greenhouse gases emitted. They're running off of renewable energy sources, so they're very good for the environment. There's no heat being generated. There's no loud noises, such as when you're in the field. A lot of remote mobile units are run off of diesel power generators, and those generators are, you know, they're not helping with climate change. That's for sure. I think there's a lot of people that are still trying to understand whether, you know, global climate change is a real issue or not. And when you look at all of the major catastrophes that have happened during the last few years, both locally and on a global basis, it really begs the question. So yeah, I think that there is a major trend on a global basis to move towards renewable energy. And one of the things that I'm seeing is on a political level, there's some efforts to slow progress down as they relate to renewable energy sources. And I think people all over the world kind of need to start making some noise, get with their local politicians, and let them know how important it is to have a positive impact, both on global climate change and something as simple as just lowering energy bills. The United States, I came across some figures the other day, $202 billion a year in utility or energy costs associated with commercial buildings in the United States. And at least 5% of that is contributed to energy provided to power up air conditioning units. And it's even worse on the residential side, because if anybody's ever watched their power meter on their home, when they turn their air conditioner off and on, your air conditioner can use up to 95% of the energy in your entire home when it's turned on.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
That's a lot of power.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Ralph, are there any, you know, we talk about technology a lot on this show, and even in a situation like you have, where it's a viable solution, you've got the technology, are there market barriers that are preventing you from sort of rolling this out across the country?
I think part of it has to do with education, educating business owners and consumers in general. And because we're a small, you know, startup, we're just getting started. And so we're growing the company by word of mouth, just starting to spend money on a marketing campaign. So yeah, just your typical difficulties in a technology-based startup. So I think as time moves forward, it gets easier.
So then, are there things that, if there are listeners out there that are really intrigued by your product, are there things that they could be doing? Should they be contacting their local politicians? Should they be contacting their public utilities commissions? What would you recommend that they do if they would like to get involved?
There's many green initiative organizations, both at city, town levels, at the county levels, and state levels, everywhere I go. So individuals can certainly contact their local organizations. You do a search on the internet on green initiatives, and there's to work with all of the local public officials to make sure that everybody knows that the state of California will help reimburse up to 30% of your cost for installing, you know, green initiative related items. Wow. Anything related to lowering or improving the energy efficiencies in your home or your commercial building. And that's in most states that I visited during the last couple of years, people I talked to, there's programs available. Colorado has a couple of good programs.
Well, and Ralph, I wanted to ask you about this. I mean, they came out just a couple hours ago and say that back east there are tens of thousands of people who are going to need homes here in the next week or so because there's nothing left. There's no clean water, and there's none of that infrastructure. Are there ways that that people can engage from the East Coast and bring your products in to help with water filtration, to help create this virtual power plant out there in these smaller communities so that they can stay and work through the cleanup?
Yes, if somebody wanted to talk to us, they could call our number, contact us via email, get onto one of our websites. We've got a website located at greenprm.com, and there's a second website located at greenrealitiesllc.com. And there's information on there about our products and a way to contact us. And
what's the number, Ralph?
The number is 855-75-POWER, POWER.
Okay, so for listeners interested, it's greenprm.com or 855-75-POWER.
And Ralph, we've talked about sort of these rural areas in developing countries, and we've talked about use of this virtual power plant in outside of an emergency and during an emergency. Are there also, it sounds like, there are military applications as well. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, there are. In fact, our smaller unit, the Solar Cube, was originally designed to be able to go after a lot of the military applications. So there's a huge initiative within the military today to go green, reduce energy costs, reduce our dependency on foreign oil, help with global climate change. And so both of our water products are a perfect match for military applications, both at the base level and out in the field. So that small water unit, for example, provides 2,000 gallons of clean water per day. One of our founders, Hans, has some experience working with the military for many years. And one of the things that he saw in the field is that it's not always our soldiers, so to speak, that are getting attacked, but it's our support troops, people that are delivering food, water, fuel, support lines in general. And when you're in the field like that, the enemies are locating our troops based on the heat signal that's generated and on noise from diesel-powered generators. So, this unit doesn't produce any heat signal. There's no noise coming from it, which makes it very nice when you're out in the middle of nowhere, trying to be quiet and stay safe.
Well, and that emphasizes the point that you said that there's pushback on renewable energy, but really what it is renewable energy is not all about saving the earth. It's about, for the military, it's about saving lives. It's about reducing those fuel and water convoys. It's about saving the military money. And so in that respect, it's always baffling to me that there's this pushback because it's renewable, where it's a true solution.
Yeah, one of the things I've heard in discussions I've had with people lately is, the price of gas has gone down. So as soon as the price of gas starts to go down, or propane in general, out here in this area, people think, oh, prices are going down, it's okay to start using it again, you don't have to conserve, and we don't need to worry about this renewable energy stuff because it's new and we don't understand it and doesn't work when the sun goes down, kind of thing. And so I think once people realize that we really need to focus on the long term, short-term gas prices, fuel prices, electricity will go up and down, but as we get more and more renewable energy sources implemented in scale, those prices are going to go down, and they're not going to do the damage done to our climate that has taken place during the last century or so.
Right.
Yep, absolutely. It's sort of that three-legged stool. It's about security, it's about price, but it's also about the convenience and the ability to use this using renewable sources. And as we always talk about, it isn't just about that green element. It's about this element that it can be used anywhere. And we've seen through the years, especially on the military front, how much danger these guys get in moving these supply lines. So I love these technologies, Ralph. Thank you.
Yeah, and so really, to tie up this show and talk about this show is really important on discussing how we really need to take a proactive approach and build these resilient communities, and technologies like Ralph has been talking about can really help us do that and help us before a disaster and also help us get back on our feet after a disaster.
Those things, but also help us create more resilient communities globally, as well as with military. I mean, there are so many applications for this stuff. And Ralph, I know you're joining us from San Diego. We want to say thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Where is
I've enjoyed the discussion.
Ralph, where's the next technology going? What's the most exciting thing on the horizon with green power resource management?
Well, I think the biggest roadblock to growth today has to deal with battery technology, both for our company and for the auto industry and many other products that are looking to use renewable energy sources, but there's some limitations. And one of those is what happens when it's cloudy outside and you can't generate solar power, or every night the sun goes down. So we're getting ready to make an announcement here in the near future about some new technology. It's not being developed by us. It's with a company that we plan to partner with going forward that will make not only our products, but other people's products much more powerful. The amount of energy storage in the batteries will quadruple.
Wow.
And the cost will go down, and the physical footprint will go down.
Well, Ralph,
so that's been a long time in the works, and I think that's the next major step that needs to happen in order to get renewable energy sources moving forward much faster, especially in the automobile industry.
Absolutely. Ralph, thank you so much for joining us. And to learn more about the technologies of the virtual power plant as well as the mobile solar powered water filtration units, go to greenprm.com or greenrealitiesllc.com or just call 855-75-POWER. As always, Kelly, great show.
This was amazing. Thanks so much for having me, and thank you so much, Ralph, for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kelly, where can people learn more about these things at the Women in Energy site?
We can go to my site, rapidtechtransit.com, or Women in Energy is WIE-womeninenergy.com, or you could check out my blog, rmenergyblog.com.
Kelly, thank you so much, and thank you all for listening. Make sure that you go out there, you look at these things, and you try to do all that you can to give back in these green technologies, as well as to those folks on the East Coast. We're thinking of you. Have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us.